Good evening, Jay.
Hey Phil, how you doing, bud?
I'm doing very well.
Good.
Beautiful day.
Yep, sure is.
Jay, last week we were talking about Moses. Here we are talking about it again.
Yeah, different person with him. Yeah.
Jethro and Moses, the story of how Jethro mentored Moses.
Right.
Is what we're going to look at today. JR, we get through life, as we go through life, hopefully we're gathering wisdom. Hopefully we're seeing things and observing things and figuring things out so that we can help people.
Right.
God
right.
don't mean us to put that under a bush, does he?
No.
That little song, remember?
Yeah.
Let your light shine.
Yeah. Hide under a bushel, no.
We have a choice. We can learn from experiences, or we can learn from the experience of others. Now, when we learn from our own experiences, sometimes it's painful. It hurts and sets us back, frustrating, consuming, can be all consuming. But learning from others' mistakes shortens the time that
Yeah.
it takes to learn.
But we have to listen.
We had to listen. We had to learn how to listen.
Yeah.
A wise person, though, allows other people to go through the stress and learns from their experiences. We need three type of people in our lives, the study today says. We need friends. Now, Job might say different. But we need friends. We want those that can walk alongside us and mutually support our goals as we
We can share
grow
things.
and
Share. Yeah.
try to do God's will and encourage us. And then we need mentors. We need those people that are wise heads and that we can learn from. They share their wisdom and life lessons, and they challenge us to grow and fulfill the expectations that God has for us. I love those people.
Yeah.
They try my thoughts sometimes, but I love it when I'm challenged like that. And then, Jay, we need those that we mentor. We need to put ourselves out there and be that mentor to someone who needs it. Someone whom we can share our experiences, someone who we can encourage, and everybody can profit from the wisdom of the mistakes of others.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody can profit from that. God doesn't put us through things just to be putting us through things.
No.
It's to help us align ourselves with His will and to grow. And we can share those things with others, and it's our Christian duty to do it. So today we're looking, without the mentoring of Jethro, wonder where Moses would be.
Moses might not have lasted too long.
Jethro was Moses' father-in-law.
Right.
And we'll be looking in Exodus today. After the Israelites were freed from slavery, they needed to learn what it meant to live as the people of God, under God's rule. Now, this is at a time where they didn't have the written law yet. So Moses, as the leader, had begun to act as a judge between different Hebrew people and helping to resolve disputes.
You know, sometimes I think I've made this mistake. I think of the Hebrew people as being critical, grumbling, and they were those things. But at this point in time in their history, Phil, they had been in Egypt for over 400 years. God had not been talking to them all the time. Like, there were no prophets during that time talking to the people like they are from this point on up through their history. They didn't have any rules. They didn't have any laws. The moral laws weren't there, or the sacrificial laws, or the laws of any kind of laws of God. So they were kind of learning God as they went along. So I think I probably need to give them a little more slack in my criticism of them, because they were kind of flying by the seat of their pants, you would say, as far as God was concerned.
They sure didn't have the tools that we have today.
No,
The
no,
literature
no.
and the God's Word and the Holy Spirit,
No.
they lacked in some things.
They didn't have the leadership that they're gonna have over the next 40 years. They hadn't had that at all for 400 years.
Yeah.
You think about how long it is. And so I think we need to give them a little more slack maybe, but they were a grumbling people, we know that.
But, you know, they defeated Egypt, they come out of Egypt.
Yeah,
Look at the plagues and the parting of the Red Sea.
right.
And here we are, we're about, I don't know, 30 miles from the base of Mount Sinai.
Right.
So we're looking here at Jethro and Moses.
Yeah, okay. We're looking in chapter 18, verses 9 through 11, and kind of a little bit of background here. Jethro, as you said, was Moses' father-in-law. When Moses left Egypt on the run because he'd killed an Egyptian, he headed south and east over around close where Mount Sinai is. In fact, Moses is probably back pretty close to where he spent those 40 years with outside of Egypt. And long story short about Jethro, when Moses ran from Egypt and went to that area, he came upon a well to get some water, and there were some ladies there, ladies there who had some flocks there, and they also had some big water urns that they were filling up. And they had been run away from the well by some shepherds. Moses sees what has happened, runs the shepherds off, helps the ladies water their flocks, and these ladies go home and tell their dad, who happens to be Jethro, that this Hebrew from Egypt helped them. He says, go get him, bring him home, we're going to feed him a meal. Well, ended up that one of those girls became Moses' first wife, and that's how Jethro gets into the picture. Now, when Moses went back to Egypt after God called him to bring the Egyptians out, he sent his wife and his sons, 2 sons, back to Jethro because he didn't want them going to Egypt with him and getting killed or something like that. So Moses sent his family, his immediate family, back to Jethro. And what we're seeing now is Jethro has now found out that Moses and the Israelites, the Hebrews, have gotten out of Egypt, and he's bringing them back home. He's bringing Moses' wife and his son to Moses, and that's where we're seeing them meet up close to Mount Sinai. It says, Jethro rejoiced over all the good things the Lord had done for Israel when he rescued them from the power of the Egyptians. Blessed be the Lord, Jethro exclaimed, who rescued you from the power of the Egyptians and from the power of Pharaoh. He has rescued the people from under the power of Egypt. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods, because he did wonders when the Egyptians acted arrogantly against Israel. As soon as Jethro got back and brought Moses' wife and sons, Moses threw a big party, and Moses proceeded to tell Jethro everything that had happened while he was gone. We don't know how long he was gone, but probably months, if not a year or two, getting the Hebrews out of Egypt. Moses tells Jethro what God has done. And that's where we see Jethro rejoiced over all the good things he had done. Jethro then talks about the power of the Egyptians. I think Moses wrote this and used the word power of the Egyptians about 3 different times there to emphasize Egypt was the most powerful nation on earth, but yet God's power was greater. Everything that the Egyptians tried to do, God was more powerful, and he brought the people out in spite of the power that the Egyptians had. The power of God is a constant theme throughout the Bible. We even see of course, in the Old Testament, Moses, Elijah, and Elisha always were doing miraculous wonders and signs. Then we see in the New Testament that Jesus demonstrated that same power. Look at the times he calmed the seas, and nature was under his control. If Jesus said for nature to do something, it did it. And then we see finally that Jesus had that power when he conquered death and conquered sin for us by being raised from the grave. So God's power is shown throughout the New Testament and the Old Testament. Now we see Phil, I think we see in verse 10, how that Jethro became converted at that point in time. He said in those verses, I know the Lord is greater than all other gods. Jethro realized in his heart that the Lord of Moses, the God of Moses, was the most powerful God on earth. I know that he's greater than any other God because he did all these wonders. And he alludes to the fact that he did all the wonders, even though the Egyptians acted arrogantly. We remember why the Hebrews were in Egypt to start with. God sent Joseph there, and then he eventually sent the Hebrew people there because of the drought that was happening in the Promised Land. But we also know that during that time, Joseph saved the Egyptian people by interpreting a dream. Said we're going to have 7 years of drought, and then we're going to have 7 years of good crops and 7 years of drought. And he kept them from starving to death. But yet, even though Joseph did that for them, the Egyptians became arrogant toward the Hebrew people and acted terribly toward them and enslaved them for those period of time. So this sets the stage for Jethro being able to mentor Moses as this journey of 40 years in the desert begins.
Yeah.
We'll see what he does for Moses.
You know, that arrogance, that summarizes a lot of sins.
Yeah, it does.
That's the root cause of a lot of them, especially with the Hebrew people.
Yeah.
So in verse 14, it says, when Moses' father-in-law saw everything he was doing for them, he asked, what is this you're doing for the people? Why are you alone sitting as judge while all the people stand around you from morning till evening? Moses replied to his father-in-law, because the people come to me to inquire of God. Whenever they have a dispute, it comes to me, and I make a decision between one man and another. I teach them God's statutes and laws. What you're doing is not good, Moses' father-in-law said to him. You will certainly wear out both yourself and these people who are with you, because the task is too heavy for you. You can't do it alone. So, Moses had no time, and he's sitting and listening from daylight to dark. It looks like, difficulties happen with people.
And we got to remember how many there were too.
There's 600,000 men plus whatever family they have.
Probably well over 1 million people.
Yeah, so we're sinful people. We have disagreements and disputes will occur. Well, imagine sitting there and listening to that.
Yeah.
From sun up to sundown. Such was the case with the children of Israel as they started out and made their way from Egypt into the land that God had promised them.
I think that proves how humble Moses was, because if he hadn't been humble, he wouldn't have done that very long, would he? He wouldn't have put up with it.
You know how many family squabbles you have?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And then imagine all those families.
Yeah.
For one man, he was right. It was too much. It's quite a challenge that he was facing. He found himself spending his whole day trying to make a decision between this man, that, one man and another. And it says through observation, Jethro discerned that there was a difficult place for Moses to be in. And the people were going to get frustrated because they were standing all day.
Right.
And in turn, nothing was getting done. So, for them to occupy Moses like that continually with little menial disputes and spats back and forth, it wasn't really what God wanted him doing.
Have you ever been in a situation where you have had the opportunity to offer advice and first off, I had the opportunity 2 or 3 times to, when I would change a job, that I would go into a position where I didn't know what the people under me were actually doing. A few times I tried to say, we're gonna do it like this. Then I realized, you don't do that. You go in there and you learn what they do and you watch them. You go out in the field where they're working and watch them do their job. And then it's much easier to get them to listen to you
Yeah.
when they think you know a little bit about what's going on. But if you just walk into a position and say, "That's not, you're not doing it. You need to do it this way, that way." We see Jethro observed what
Yeah.
was going on.
Yeah. And when he observed, he was able to ascertain that Moses
Yeah.
was never going to be able to do nothing. He might not have any grandchildren because he's out there
Yeah, that's right.
judging the people all day long.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you observe? You ask what, you ask why,
Mm-hmm.
you look and you
Mhm.
listen,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not like you just jump in and offer an opinion.
Mm-hmm.
He had went through this in order to give him some good, sound advice, which was trying to be helpful, and lessen Moses' load. So it's something for us to remember through observations and questions that, we can mentor people. We can lead those that are, to come to an understanding of a situation. And we can even sometimes hear that, and maybe we don't think we're too busy. Maybe we just think, this is what's occupying my time now, and not be really looking for a better way. And somebody might offer something that makes all the sense in the world. So, as mentor, once you reach the point of seeing problems or challenges, and you can see where somebody could use some guidance, once you see the problem, and pretty well have it defined in your mind, it's at that time that God usually can give you some type of solution to help.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as jumping in there and saying, Jethro saying, "Well, Moses, here's what I do,"
Yeah.
he didn't do that, did he?
And when we put ourselves in the position of like Jethro was, and we actually try to learn what's going on instead of jumping in first, that shows the other person we're interested. That shows the person that we're not just trying to change what they're doing. We're trying to learn and see how what's happening with the situation.
And he asked.
We're
Moses.
interested.
Yeah. He asked Moses. He asked him, "What do you do? What are you doing?
Yeah.
Why are you doing it?" Moses says, "I'm teaching them God's statutes and laws, and all those things were good, but God's statutes and laws weren't getting taught as much as it was Bill and George over here fighting.
Right,
and we're
right.
going to have to settle Bill and George's dispute."
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference between constructive criticism and just being critical?
Well, I think the difference is when you offer alternatives, when you are being constructive, when you think about what's going on, as we've already talked, you go through the situation in your mind and you say, well, this might work better. But then when you just say, you got to change, you got to do it like this, that's doesn't work at all. We offer alternatives.
Jethro told Moses he couldn't do this by himself. Was there any other time that you can think of in the Bible stories where God told someone he couldn't do it by himself?
I'm sure there is one, Phil.
What about Adam and Eve?
Yeah.
Yeah, he made him a helper, didn't he?
Yeah, right, exactly.
Jethro observed that it wasn't good that Moses was trying to govern the people alone. There's too many people, and continuing to work alone wouldn't be good for anybody.
He said you're going to wear yourself out.
You're gonna
Both
wear-
you're going to wear yourself
yeah,
out
that's
and the
right.
people.
And you do.
But
We've all had jobs where we work too much, too long, too hard.
But we've also had jobs where we felt like nobody else was going to do it. I'd rather do it myself.
I know, and that's
I'd rather
not,
do it myself.
that's not good. It's not good.
First off, you're not teaching anybody else to do what you're doing, and you're wearing yourself out. But we tend to do that sometimes.
And in these next verses, it shows how we should encourage with some sound counsel.
Yeah. And he didn't just tell him what to do. He
No.
said, now he goes and explains what he thinks would be
Explains, lays it
a
out
good
there,
way to
doesn't
do it. Jethro says, now listen to me. I will give you some advice, and God be with you. I think Jethro was saying now, if you'll listen to this, I believe God's in this. God understands what's going on, and I think God will be with you if you'll do this. You are to be the one to represent the people before God and bring their cases to Him. Instruct them about the statutes and laws and teach them the way to live and what they must do. But you should select from all the people able men, God-fearing, trustworthy, and hating dishonest prophet. Place them over the people as commanders of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Jethro says, I'm going to give you some advice, and I believe God will bless you if this is what you do. First off, he said three things. He said, still represent the people before God. Because there's going to be times when it's not brother against brother or neighbor against neighbor. It's God issues. It's the issue that the people have, a person has with God, what's going on in their life. He says, continue to do those. You're God's representative to the people. Second, he says, you need to teach them the statutes and laws. And we know that later on, the laws are given to Moses, and he does begin that process of teaching them all the statutes and the laws that God has for them. And he says, teach them the way to live and what they must do. They needed a guide. They needed a leader. They had not had a leader or a guide other than an Egyptian slave master for years and years and years. And then he told them, he said, get other people to help you with these trivial matters, the matters between neighbors and friends and family members, and that will free you up to do the more important things, which is representing God for the people and then teaching them how to live their lives. Then he says, now the people you pick have to be of a certain group, of a certain manner. They need to be God-fearing. And here this is Jethro, who is, we would call him a heathen. Well, I think he's been converted. He's not a heathen anymore, I don't believe. He's talking about being having God-fearing men. Men who would appreciate and take into consideration how God would handle a situation. Then he says they should be trustworthy, should be firm, should be faithful, should be reliable. They should be the kind of men that don't make excuses when the work doesn't get done or when something is not done properly. Then he finally says they should hate dishonest profit. There was probably going to be times, Phil, when bribes could have been passed back and forth and issues decided between neighbors by who has the most money. And Jethro says, no, don't do that. Have someone who hates dishonest profit. Jethro was a good man. We don't know much about him, but this interaction he has right here with Moses, you can tell he's a good man. And I think these traits are ones that he probably had. So, did this work out? What happened, do you think? Verse 24 tells us. Verse 24 says, Moses did everything Jethro suggested from that point on. Began the process of setting up people. He represented them before God, the people before God. He listened to Jethro.
Yeah.
If Jethro had come in and said, Moses, what you're doing is wrong, you got to change, you're going to kill yourself, and this is the way you're going to do it, not mention the word God in any of it, it probably would have been difficult for Moses to swallow. But Moses took it. And why it would work because I think at verse 18 or 19 says it, because God was with him.
Yeah.
God was in this process of Jethro teaching Moses and giving Moses, being a mentor to Moses.
Moses might have said, if God had told him that, he said, oh Lord, it's okay, I can do it. I can sit here from daylight to dark. So what do? We pray each day. God to lay on our heart somebody that, perhaps needs some wisdom, influence, that we feel like we can help. We should search out those people.
We should also pray that God send people to us when we need that mentor.
Search out somebody to serve as our mentor.
That's exactly right. Send somebody to us when we need it, which we do from time to time.
And ask them to walk alongside you, join you in prayer, and help you grow. And then choose to mentor someone else. Man, put yourself out there. The rewards of doing that are greater than anything you'll spend. When you know that you've helped somebody, it's such a blessing.
Exactly.
You speak to them, and you see them grow, and you see somebody getting their life together. And it should be somebody of the same gender. It shouldn't. It's best not to mix genders when you're doing that, but mentor somebody of your own gender. And thank God when you see the results of it. Thank God for your mentor, and then for the opportunity to mentor someone else.
Yep.
It's a good study. Jay, next week we'll be getting into Moses and
again.
Joshua.
Yeah, Joshua.
Joshua was his buddy.
Yep.
And we'll be looking at their relationship.
We're going to look at several relationships over the next month or two, different ones in the Bible.
Thank you for joining our study today. I hope you can come back and be with us next week.